Welcome, everybody. Great to have you here for something to talk about from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We are sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island. These talks Monday, Wednesday, and Friday are. Fieldstone offers innovative and compassionate care up on Rolling Bay. If you'd like to learn more, schedule a tour, find out about their day stay or respite programs, make a note, 360-689-4314. And we were just talking about the Point Elliott Treaty. We're coming up on Treaty Day, and we'd like to acknowledge that the Senior Community Center is on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish tribe, the Coast Salish people, the people of the clear salt water. We are very grateful for their hospitality, and we work to build bridges with them, and we honor their work about this land since time immemorial. And speaking of land, we're going to talk a little about gardening, about soil. And with us to do that is Anne Lovejoy.
Thanks, Reed. Yeah, we'll get the dirt on the soil, right?
All right.
So one of the things that I think is so hilarious is that the minute it starts to get nice, everybody gets super excited about gardening. But around here, it doesn't stay nice all the time. And so I think it's really a good thing to kind of pace yourself at this time of year. The first thaw, sunny day, everybody's out there like digging and planting, and then super bewildered why things don't necessarily do so great. But one of the things to think about is like after freezes, especially, which apparently it's going to get chilly again next week at night. When the soil is frozen, sometimes it's a good idea to sit back with a seed catalog and instead of weeding, do your seeding, right? Start thinking about what kind of seeds you would like and what kind of things you'd like to grow. I think one of the things to think about too is like, the soil is really fragile, and our footprints can cause a lot of compression. If you think about how much you weigh and divide that in half, and you think about one footprint holding your entire body weight, that's a lot of compression on the soil. At least it is for me. Now, somebody more petite, okay, it might not be quite so much. But one thing that you can do if you really want to get in those beds is put down a piece of maybe plywood or a length of wood plank, and that spreads and whatever your weight may be, that spreads it over a bigger surface area, and it is less compressing for the fragile soil. You probably notice, like when you start digging at this time of year, the soil seems so open and beautiful compared to the rock hard adobe that it turns into by June, July. But allowing it to stay open like that is a huge part of success with plants, especially things like vegetables and annuals that need to grow quickly. Or if they get a check in their growth, they're just not going to come back from that usually. So one of the things to think about is instead of being outside, you can start sowing your seeds inside. This is a really good time to start sowing some of the earliest seed crops to transplant as winter sort of winds down and spring approaches, which it actually does sooner or later. When you're going to grow seeds, first of all, keeping seeds. Now, this is my jar, my perfect seed growing jar, which I got at the Senior Center for $0.25, but has a great top and solid, so it keeps them dry. I can see what's in there, so it isn't a mystery that gets shoved to the back of the closet. But this is a good way to keep seed over several years. Not all seed is good for several years. Some seed is good indefinitely. I mean, archaeologists have actually found ancient wheat that they have sprouted out of, pyramids, right? That's like 3,000 years old. So I can't guarantee that with your lettuce. Lettuce is more usually 1-2 years, maybe 3. But one of the things you can think about if you have older seeds sitting around, you've had it for a couple of years, you're not sure if it's any good or not, that's a great crop for growing indoors and having in your salads. And my favorite seed trays for this kind of thing are the ones. These are much recycled. They're the infamous clamshells. You can't really recycle these things, but you can recycle them at home because they make great little seed houses. Crash. You can tell this one's been used before, but I put a little soil in the bottom. They already have air holes around the bottom usually. And if they don't, you can poke them with a poker or stick them with the end of scissors and get some air holes and drainage holes in there. Then you need something to put them in so they don't drip all over your windowsills and so forth. So I have combinations of like a clamshell that fits perfectly into a container that once held brown turkey, I believe, or chicken or something of that nature. So now this compatible partnership has gone on for many years. And you can see this one has a lot of holes in the bottom and the top. So this is one that's really good for quick growing crops like the little baby greens. And one thing you can do is cut them with nail scissors as they sprout and then sow a few more seeds on, and you'll get this wonderful ongoing mixture of little bits that you can trim for salads. And I use things like the mesclun set, you know, it's like a whole bunch of different kinds of lettuce or Portuguese kale. There's 80 seeds in here. There's no way I'm going to grow 80 of these giant kale plants. But if I sprinkle a handful in my salad mix, I'll eat them when they're babies, right? Same with the blends of lettuce and different kinds of spinach. And if you sow a lot of spinach, you can thin them with your nail scissors and leave a few. And as they get bigger, those can be transplanted and you can get those out into the garden in about a month, right? So that's one really good way to kind of move through this. One thing you want to think about is shallow containers usually make the best trays, 2 to 3 inches, maybe 4. Those plastic containers are great as long as they have the air holes. And like I said, you do want to, if they're funky, like maybe some vegetables didn't get used quite as quickly as they might have, you want to bleach them and rinse them thoroughly and then put them, let them dry, and then put them on a rimmed leak-proof tray. And if you don't want to use the plastic kind like me, you can also use like a solid bottom plant flat without holes, or Baker's half sheet pans. I've picked up a few of those at yard sales, and they hold quite a lot of plant pots and things, which is great. And then they won't get everything funky when you overwater. If you're like me, a little bit carefree in my watering technique, and sometimes that water goes all over the place, or I fill it too full and it leaks out the bottom. You definitely want to protect all your furniture from that. So one thing you super do want to use is sterilized seed starting soil. You don't need very much, but it's really worth the cost to avoid molds and mildews. A lot of people, for years, people would say, right, even garden writers would say, oh yeah, just go dig up some of your garden soil and sterilize it in your home oven. Just don't ever do that. For one thing, it smells horrible. For another thing, you're killing perfectly good garden soil for no reason, and it really does not work the way you think it might. So just don't do that. But put an inch or two of dampened seed starting mix in each container, and then you can sow your seeds at the depth that's specified on every packet. Like a lot of times these little seeds, it will just say barely cover, you know, or scratch them in, or you just kind of sprinkle them on and then rub your fingers over the top. And that's enough to get them covered just a little bit. And seeds are smart. They'll figure out where they need to go. They'll put their roots down and their green parts up. You don't need to be poking around at them. But do label each container, because I have to say that when all those little starts come up, they all look a lot the same. And so you're like, is this the cabbage? Is this the green mix? So I use painter's tape, that blue painter's tape, and stick it on the side of the container and write on with a Sharpie what it is. And the expected emergent time. That's one really good thing to remind yourself, because then you can say, gosh, it's been 3 weeks. It's supposed to come up in 2 days. Maybe that seed really isn't any good. Sometimes when that happens, I found when I throw it out into the garden, it does come up eventually, but sometimes it's really not worth it. And that putting the expected emergence time on there, and it might say 7 to 10 days or something like that, that gives you a window of expectation, and you can tell if your older seed is actually going to show up or not. And unfortunately, it isn't only your older seed. Some of the sort of cheaper seed companies are not very picky about what they package, because it's been demonstrated that most seed growers, most gardeners, if something doesn't work well, we think it's our fault, and we're very slow to blame the seed companies. And so they know that.
If you knew my gardening, you know it was my fault, even though.
I'm not saying it never is, but when I was manager of Bainbridge Gardens Nursery, I attended a lot of national conferences with speakers from all over the place. And that was a really interesting one. There was this whole panel of small seed companies and big seed companies. All the small ones like Renee's or Johnny's, Territorial, those guys are all completely dedicated, and they really they do a lot of testing of their seed. Some of the bigger ones, just saying, would say stuff like, oh yeah, we don't really bother about that because customers always think it's their fault. And if we have a crop failure, it's not that big a deal. I was astounded. And that's not the kind of thing you're going to hear in public. That's the kind of thing you hear in these like how to make more money by being a jerk conference kinds of things. Anyway, one of the things that's emergent date thing can do for you is make sure that you're using seed that's pretty viable. And then, make a note of which company you used. Sometimes you can just like clip the little top off and tape that on too. And then you'll be like, oh yeah, this Ed Hume stuff comes up pretty well. And it's true. Ed Hume is a local seed packer. He's still using equipment that's like 150 years old. In fact, Reed, you went with us on that bus. We took a trip to visit the Ed Hume's nursery and seed packing factory, or whatever you'd call it, facility in Puyallup. It was amazing. And they have all these huge bins full of like drawers of parts that they have bought over the years from different places around the world that use these old machines. And they're the only place that's still using them now. But they were initially water powered, right? And then they were foot pedal powered. And now they've got, electrical power, but they're still using all those old ancient, cogs and bits and things. It's pretty fascinating.
It'd be fun to go back there again.
We should do that. That was a great field trip. So yeah, one of the things you want to also think about if you're growing stuff inside is baby seedlings need more light than most windowsills offer. They don't want to be in your south or west facing window where they get really, well, I presume if they get any sun at all, it tends to be on the hotter side. And that's not the window you want to use. And in fact, east is actually great. That gives you a pretty even light. North gives pretty even light, but it's not always quite enough. So to avoid spindly stems, if you can do it, you want to put your seed trays under fluorescent fixtures. Now, we always used to use those big shop light fixtures with special grow light bulbs. But what's interesting is that LED bulbs work just as well as any kind of bulb. So you can use those little bendy lamps, LED lamps, like I have a craft lamp like that. Thank you, Rita. And I use that over plants and it works really, really well. So you want to make sure that they get the kind of light they need, because most of them are going to want between 12 and 14 hours of daylight of light a day. Well, here in the Great Northwest, we don't actually get that much sun until much later in the year. So the grow lights are really a good idea to maintain that even, steady growth. Does that make sense? The other thing you really want to do, people wonder like why my seeds don't germinate. The grow lights won't help them germinate, but what really does help them germinate is consistent moisture. And you want to check your moisture level. I just lift the whole container. And if it feels too light, then I put lukewarm water in the bottom of the tray. And the bottom watering discourages some of the real big problems with seed growing, like damping off, which are fluffy little gray or white molds that attack seedlings in soil. The other thing that really helps that is good air circulation. And if you have a little oscillating fan, one of the little ones that goes back and forth like that, put that near your seedlings. That will keep the air moving, especially in the, if it's in the warmer part of the day. Again, right, that seems ridiculous to even say that when it's pretty darn cold out there, but indoors it can be quite variable. You don't want to put your seedlings right where they're going to get forced air from an air vent either, if you have forced air heating, because that off on is actually pretty hard on plants, all kinds of plants, but especially seedlings. So one of the pieces you want to look at too is like if you start getting that mold, you can lightly scratch as if you were kind of mini hoeing, slightly scratch the surface. That will take that down, and then put the fan out and make sure it's getting that circulation. And if you're using this kind of container with the top, you can prop it open. I use those barbecue sticks. What do like kebab sticks?
Not sure.
And just thread them through there, and that keeps it open in the day, and it can close almost all the way, but keep it propped open with a shorter stick. I reuse everything I can, but it's a really good way to make sure they're getting consistent moisture and good air circulation at the same time, right? Once they have 4 leaves, they're ready for breakfast. Either you want to eat them for breakfast or they need breakfast, right? So give them a diluted half-strength organic fertilizer about every other week, adding it to the bottom tray after watering, and that prevents root damage. If you put fertilizer on a dry plant, it can actually stunt or even kill the roots. So you want to water first, let it absorb the water, and then add some of that diluted half-strength organic fertilizer, like that Dr. Earth liquid stuff is perfect. Really low numbers, but just really even. And it's very, it seems to really do the trick. Like everything likes it. Even plants that are going to want bigger doses of fertilizer later don't want it when they're babies. They can't really take that. But when seedlings are 4 to 5 inches tall and have like several sets of true leaves, that's when you want to transplant them. And so now you can use 4-inch pots. And if you have a lot of leftovers, like I do, hundreds, you can make sure they're washed and bleached if necessary. I usually do that at the end of the planting season. I put everything in big buckets of bleach water, wash them out, get them clean. And that way, when they're stacked and put away, they're clean already. And there's no big surprises when you pull them out, like, oh, that one was gross. Or if there's signs of mold or mildew, you're allowed to recycle those things. But generally speaking, you can use these pots over and over and over for many, many years. So you want to gently transfer the seedlings into individual pots, and you handle them by the largest pair of leaves. You don't grab them by the neck, because that's the really vulnerable part. And if you grab the stem of a seedling, you probably will do quite a bit of damage to the vascular system. So again, gently pull it by the leaves, and you can use your other hand to scoop up the rooty bits, plunk it in its new home, pat it in gently, water it in lightly. And that doesn't mean gush it with a huge flow of water, but use a little gentle sprinkle to make sure you get the air pockets out. It sounds like a fussy thing, but once you get going, it goes really, really fast. So then you want to lightly tap each pot just on the table to settle the soil and remove the air pockets. Gently tamp that soil down over the little roots. And the goal is kind of snug, not jam-packed, right? Label your pots, at least a few of them, so that again, and I kind of put them in, this is when I move from one seed thing to a tray full of 4-inch pots usually. And you want to label at least a few of those so you don't forget who they all are. And you want the light about 4 to 5 inches above the seedling, and you still want between 12 and 14 hours of light every day. And again, that's not something that's going to happen by nature around here for quite a while. So that that needs to be watched. And some people use timers. I'm usually around home enough that I can manage that. A little extra daylight doesn't hurt a thing, but not enough can be kind of discouraging for them. As spring arrives, you're going to start hardening off your seedlings, starting with cool crops like greens and broccoli, peas, stuff like that. Begin with an hour outdoors, placing the flats in light shade. And then, so not direct light for a day or two. And then over the next few days, give them more sun exposure, increasing outdoor time. And finally, when you get to a full day, then you can plant them in the garden. It usually takes about a week to get stuff fully hardened off. If you just take them out and move them into the garden, into the cold, chilly soil of the garden after they've been in your cushy house, they're often not very happy, and their growth will actually get checked. And they don't just stop growing. Sometimes they lose strength, because again, root damage can occur when they get too cold or too hot. So you do want to gentle them out there. Now, that's not the case if you're going to grow peas and you just plant your peas right in the garden. Obviously, they'll acclimate themselves. But you want to make sure that the plants have a chance to get adjusted to their new situation. And the interesting thing is, even on cloudy days like this, they're going to get more light outside than they do from our grow lights if they're in so-called full sun, what passes for full sun here in the Northwest, right? Now, one thing you want to think about is that this is not time for everything to start growing, right? Like, it feels like the minute spring peeps around the corner, people also want to start growing tomatoes. You're like, yeah, no. I mean, you can start tomatoes now. In fact, there's these wonderful mixes. So you can choose, you can grow a whole bunch. The problem with the mixes is you have no idea what they are, right? When they come up, they're all tomatoes, yeah, but what kind they are, who has a clue? Nobody. And it will sometimes tell on the packet, like this one has Black Seaman, Early Cascade, Evergreen, Flame Orange, Garden Peach, Green Zebra, Jubilee, Lime Green Salad, Pink Oxheart, Ukrainian Purple, Silver Fir Tree, Sundrop, Tigerella, Pineapple, Black Crim, Black from Tula, Brandywine Pink, Cherokee Purple, Anna Russian, and Banana Legs. How on earth are you going to know what they are? But if you like adventure and you don't care too much about being super specific, a mix like this for what is that? For $2, you get the chance to have a huge number of plants that would cost you like $200. So score, right? And if you don't care too much what they are and you're willing to have an adventurous risk, I think it's great. One caveat is that we buy seeds like crazy, or I do, let's be clear, and fill the sunroom and sunny windowsills with seed trays. But a lot of those plants don't make it to the finish line. And I get asked a lot why that happens. Well, there are lots of reasons why that might happen. One thing is that peas and kale and greens, a lot of those things are happy to sprout and grow outside in early spring. They start indoors, then you can move them out perfectly happy. There's a number of plants that are not going to be very happy at all. And those are the tropical heat lovers. So that's stuff like tomatoes and, zucchini. And so peas are perfectly happy now, but the beans, any kind of runner beans or Kentucky Wonders, I love those pole beans. The pole beans are tropicals, unlike peas. And people think because they're in the same family that peas and beans can both be treated the same way, but no. Peas are amazing. They can take a lot of cold, and lots of times they'll sprout way early. Like if you're a little bit of a free spirit gardener, you might have let a few pods fall to the ground and you might find that they're coming up all over the place. My sweet peas are already up outside because I do let them sow themselves around, and they're happy to appear early. But beans, tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, corn, those are it's way too early for them and it's way too cold. So you really want to hold off on starting those until like March or even April. Or if they're fast sprouters like beans, I don't even do those till like May because they do sprout fast. And one huge key to success with heat lovers is keeping an eye on night temperatures, because no matter how warm the sunny day might get, if the nights are cold, the tomatoes will sulk and things like basil and corn and beans might just rot in the ground. And the magic number is 55 degrees Fahrenheit. When night temperatures regularly remain in the mid-50s, soil temperatures will rise to reflect that. And this is especially important for garden plots in less than full sun, because soils can stay a lot cooler longer when shaded for even a few hours a day. If you want to nudge your soil warmth a few degrees, you might consider making some hoop houses or tunnels or south-facing cold frames, or planting. One thing you can always do is plant stuff in big, dark colored pots, like tree pots. If you've bought trees at the nursery, or some nurseries let you go and gather those empty pots, or neighbors, and friends. But that, because they're tall and big with a lot of volume and dark, they'll warm up the soil a lot faster than the soil in the ground. And that will help out some of your early crops or the crops that need a little bit warmer. Mounded hotbeds also help. This is a big Victorian thing. They would talk about hotbeds, and they were made by covering several inches of like steaming hot, fresh dairy manure, for instance, with about a foot of garden soil. And you wouldn't put that kind of hot manure, steamy manure, right on a garden bed where you wanted to use it like as a blanket, because that would be too hot and it could harm the plants. But tucked under about a foot of soil, what that will do is as the manure warms the soil, the plant roots start growing quickly and dig down deeper. And as the manure rots in place, it enriches that soil. And you can enclose a hotbed with a tunnel or a hoop house made of like woven row cover or reusable greenhouse plastic, the kind that lasts for many years. And that will give warm season crops an even bigger boost. Another way to do it is with, if you go to Rotary and they have windows, a lot of times older windows, You can get several of those and make your own little mini greenhouse. They don't have to be completely sealed together, but there's enough. And one thing I used to do when I had a bigger garden is put hay bales and make an empty square or rectangle and put my plants in there, and then make a top of big windows that you could prop up with a stick when it was hot in the day and let down at night. And it made a little mini greenhouse with hay bales. And then of course that breaks down. And as the bales break down, you can kind of pull open the top, put some soil pockets in there and plant right into it. And that actually is a great way to grow potatoes because they come out clean, clean, clean. They don't get gross.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. And it's like you're ready to have the planting material for the potatoes when it's warm enough to live without the cold frame.
Isn't that cool? I just thought that was one of those things I learned from Ruth Stout, who was the sister of Rex Stout, the mystery writer. And she lived in New England, and she was awesome for not working very hard. She talked about her book. Her first book I had was called How to Have a Green Thumb Without an Aching Back. I loved it, but she was full of great ideas for doing things, not just the easy way, but in ways that used their nature positively. Like if it's going to break down, then use it like this so that it breaks down where you want it and how you want it. I just thought it was brilliant. Anyway, so I've just chewed your ear off for a while here, and I'm wondering if anybody would like to have put in some questions.
I see Cheryl's unmuted. I don't know if that means, Cheryl, you have a question or you're just hanging. So I'm just wondering, you talked a little bit about the idea of when you're ready to start seedlings for tomatoes or beans. So just look at the packet and it will tell you how long it should be to sprouting, and then you sort of back up when you think it will be 55 degrees. That's where you cross your fingers. And
yeah, but something, so like tomato plants, basically they're gonna be coming up fairly soon, like within a week to 10 days, generally speaking. So, and sometimes 2 weeks, but about that. So you want to think about how big is this plant going to be by the time I put it outside in like May or June, right? So that means you might grow tomato plants on to a gallon size, not just a 4-inch pot. You might be planting it up, and you don't put a tiny seedling in a gallon. Weirdly enough, too much loose soil like that doesn't work well for little plants. They like the roots like a little bit of containment.
so you have to do some transplanting.
You have to transplant several times. So I probably go seed tray to a 4-inch pot, to a quart, to a gallon, maybe even a 2-gallon or 2.5, and then by that time you've got a plant that's a couple feet high. You can
By that time, your living room is getting a little crowded.
Well, if you've grown 100 of them, yeah, you've got an issue. But remember, we had that wonderful, generous family for a while that did grow like a couple hundred plants, and they grew them in their daylight basement for months, but they start them in January and grow them on, and they were ready to go out in like May, right? So that's something to think about. You're going to be living with these big plants for a long, long time. That would not be the case with smaller ones. And a lot of plants like the squash, you don't need it to be humongous by the time you put it outside. The reason that we usually do bigger tomato plants is because a lot of times our season's fairly short. And if you want to get a lot of, actually harvest them, you want to have them a pretty good size by the time you put them outside, not just a little tiny 4-incher.
Yes, Marion.
I have a question about, I try to, I'm very patient about warm weather here. I never put a tomato in my ground outside, even covered, until June. But, and I see people get so excited because it's warm or sunny, and then their plants go. But it doesn't matter what I do, when I try to transplant squash of any sort, it always just kind of looks way sadder than if I plant seeds out, directly when it's really nice and warm. And I don't know what, if there's something I can do to prevent that, and I want to try to get a head start on the squash, but then it just kind of sits there and looks sad.
Well, I wonder, are you hardening off the squash plants before you take them outside or just,
Well, I don't remember so much doing that, so maybe I'm just not patient enough.
because that's one of the things that can happen is if you've had them on your windowsill and you're getting kind of tired of it and you say, okay, it's a beautiful
Yeah.
day. This is the day they're all going to move outside, but they have been living in, California, and all of a sudden you put them in Alaska. They're like,
Yeah.
what the heck? Those are definitely tropical plants. And again, it's that 55 degrees at night thing. So like my phone tells me night and day temperatures, estimates every day and for usually 10 days. And you can kind of watch that night temperature thing. And that's one of the things that will make a huge difference. Making sure that you're waiting till the temperature.
Yeah.
And that hardening up, you're talking about, like, would I put it outside for the day and bring it back in?
Well, at first, even I would put them out, especially something like the tomatoes that have been growing, say, under a grow light or whatever, and protected for several months. Then you're going to put them out for a few hours and not in direct light. You put them in some filtered light because they would get scalded
Oh,
by full
yeah.
sun, right? And then you
Mhm.
bring them back in for the night. It's like summer camp, right? And then the next day, you take them out for 4 hours and maybe they're in some sun. And then, by the end of a week, they should be able to be out in full sun. And at
Mhm.
that point, you can plant them.
No sleepovers yet, though.
No sleepovers yet. Rita, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. On the tomatoes, the determinate and indeterminate. and I can only in my yard grow cherry tomatoes because we do not get enough sustained long sun unless we cut down, half the forest. So we're not doing that. So what is your take on those? Because the determinate means that they all kind of ripen up together, right?
No, it's more about the size of the plant and the way that it grows. So like a determinate plant is going to get, and it will usually say 3 to 4 feet or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Indeterminate means there's no stopping this plant. And sometimes, remember the ones we planted at the senior center a couple of years ago, and they were the teeny wild ones, and that bush was like 8 by 10, right? That is, if you don't prune them, pinch back the growth and bush them out from the base, then they just keep going. And there are climates in which you can do that, but this isn't one of them usually, because we don't, have that kind of summer. So what you get is a lot of green tomatoes. So if you have a limited space, you want cherry tomatoes, almost all of those are determinate. And you can even look for the ones that are called patio hybrids, because the plants are going to be smaller and they will grow in one of those big tree pots or something like that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
And then can I just put my peas out in the garden straight?
I wouldn't do it yet.
No,
Just
not yet. But is it not St. Patrick's Day, but isn't it Washington's birthday someday? But it depends on the temperature, I know. But
well, peas are much more adaptable. And the thing is, every packet must have 50 peas in it, right?
Right.
When you and so you can put in a dozen and see what happens. And if they don't make it, then you put in another dozen a week later or whatever. And then, that's good anyhow, because then you're staggering when they're going to produce and you don't get a million peas all at the same time.
Okay.
Could we talk a little bit about varieties of peas and what I'd like to, there's peas that you stir fry and there are peas that you can open up, and are there differences in what we can expect to grow around here?
Oh yeah. Well, we can grow all the kinds of peas that I know of. Now, sweet peas are actually mildly toxic. So you really don't want to put them near each other so that you might get them mixed up. Though once they bloom, you'd know immediately it wasn't an edible pea, but it's still just a good idea to keep them separate. But so some of the earliest snow peas, like Avalanche, which is green, not white, and Beauregard, a bright burgundy pod, those snow peas are real early producers. And they, again, are snow peas. You can eat them pod and all, right? And all those, anything called a snow pea, you can put in, well, I even have put them in February if it starts to look like it's kind of a milder year. We're in that part of the world where a lot of the long-term prognosticators end up saying things like 50-50 chance of being wetter or drier or cooler or warmer than usual. Yeah, thanks a lot. So we have no idea. But again, peas are, seeds aren't that expensive. You can go ahead and try, and they do last a few years, right? So those are good ones. Also, one thing I really like, there's one called Feisty or shelling peas or tendril peas, they're called, and it has all this great, like little Afro curly, beautiful tendrils, and you can put those in salads and stir fries and stuff like that. Also, the snap green peas, there's a petite snap green and a couple other kinds that are snap greens. They're big on making tendrils, and it's part of what they're bred for. It's not like they're not producing, because the tendrils are as much the vegetable as the peas themselves. And those are really delicious in salads and stuff. So those are some wonderful ones. I also like Alaska. It's an early bush pea that's on the smaller side if you don't have room for giant trellises. The bush peas are really good ones to start with because they're more manageable in their growth. And like I said, you don't really need a ton of space for those. Does that make sense?
Yep, I see Marion has her hand up, but Mary had her hand up first. So
Okay.
Mary,
It's actually Beth.
hi Beth.
Hi. I can't make my video happen and I was eating, so.
So was I a little bit, but
So I want to go back to talking about soil a little bit. And I kind of ignored my vegetable garden for a few years while I was focusing on some other types of gardening. And I think I want to get manure, like Short's manure or something. And I don't recall, Anne, like how frequently you would advise putting manure on, and how long that needs to rest or work it in before you might plant in it, you know?
Great question. So it depends a lot on the manure itself. Dairy manure, I would definitely use over horse manure because,
Oh, yeah.
well, horse manure also tends to have wormers in it, and wormers
Yeah.
they come through, and so they're going to be in they kill the worms. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And also a lot of the horses are fed with the weed-free wheat from Eastern Washington, which is
Yeah.
sprayed with several things that actually persist in the soil.
Chlora, whatever.
Chlorpyrrolid is one of them, and chlorpyrrolid is the worst of them because it affects the legume family, the nightshade family, the sunflower family. It's like, what's left? Thistles. It kills all the thistles. So it's like your artichokes are dead, your tomatoes are dead, da, 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 da. And there have been incidents in local facilities where they got horse manure mixed into the compost blend. There was a bad batch a few years ago. I don't know if you remember that from a local company, and people so your seedlings come out all gnarled up because they're being exposed to chlorpyrrolid. And even at like 10 parts per billion, it still affects the plant. And it persists in the soil indefinitely. So at WSU, what you can do if you feel like your soil has been contaminated is mix in activated charcoal, which you can buy in big bags, not just like goldfish tank size bags, big bags. And you can blend that in, and that will pull the heavy metals and some of those horrible toxins and hold them. Doesn't kill them, but it holds them indefinitely. So anyway, but I usually put manure down in the fall, or like if you put it down now, you can put it on a fallow bed, a vegetable bed, and it will be totally, cooled off and rotted down in time for planting in March, say. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
When it comes, it's going to be steaming, and you're like, oh, you wouldn't want to put that on a bed of perennials because it'd just be like the wrong mix, right? But you could use it for a hotbed, like I was talking about before, right? You could put it in a vegetable bed that needed a lot of amendment, and then put more topsoil on top of it.
Right. That's what made me wonder. Okay, so that, like, if I did it within the next few weeks and put some soil on top of it, late March into May for planting.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So another thing, Rita, go ahead.
Well, yeah, and
what's your
Marion had a question too.
Oh,
so.
sorry, Mary, you go first. Go.
Oh, well, I just had a question about for the varieties of seeds that you like to use, where do you usually purchase them? Where's your
Honestly-
favorite place to purchase? Or do you just go here and there?
Well, it really depends what I'm looking for, but I really like Ed Hume seeds because they do a real lot of quality control, and those seeds tend to germinate extremely well, and they're really reasonably priced. And you know, he's gone into organic seeds, so he has quite a lot of organic varieties now, which I really like.
And so
And-
do you get yours online or do you,
You know where I get them?
Just
I get them at
the local-
Safeway. They have one of those kiosks for those
at
seeds. And they
Safeway?
have- At Safeway, they have it they have one at Ace. I think they maybe, do they have one at Rite Aid?
Ace,
No,
Rite
maybe
Aid, I think at Rite Aid sometimes they have them too.
I thought they might, but I'm not so sure. But I know they have them for sure at Safeway, which is crazy, right? Because, but instead of $8.95 for a package of Cool Heritage something or other, you can get Ed Hume has Cool Heritage something or others for $2.99 or $1.99. I'm perfectly happy with those, and I like supporting a local company too. Ed and Myrna, his wife, are super amazing early progressives. I mean, they're well into their 80s, maybe their 90s now, but they've spent many years doing incredible good works. Like
Mhm.
when there was those horrible hurricanes back east and Puerto Rico got hit so hard, I emailed Ed and said that somebody I knew was going out over there to help out, and could he maybe offer some seed. He sent her like 2 huge suitcases full of
Oh my gosh.
fast-growing, nutritious seeds. They give away like 1.5 million seed packets every year. They were giving them to people in South and Central America too. And one of the things they discovered is one year by accident, a bunch of flower seeds got mixed in too. And they were like, oh, sorry about that. And they were like, no, this is great. We grew flowers and sold them and made money in the market. So now they always send flower and vegetable seeds to all these places where there's like hurricanes and, natural disasters where people need to recover and need plants. So I love Ed Hume. Another thing he does, which I think is so cool, is you can get a lot of native plants from him, like several kinds of Clarkia, Farewell to Spring, that's a native plant. Nemophila, baby blue eyes, that's native here. California poppies, and I don't seem to have a Limnanthes package this year, but fried egg flower or Limnanthes is a beautiful, and meadowsweet as another Limnanthes that are really beautiful native wildflowers that of course are great for native bees, right?
Mhm.
What's not to
Thank
love?
you.
Who's Rita, I think, right?
Yeah, sorry, Marion, about jumping in there. So what about chicken manure? How do you feel about that? Or how do you feel about that?
So chicken manure, it really depends on whose chickens they are. Like if it's around here, it's somebody who's giving their chickens beautiful chicken feed and they're not like medicated or having horrible stuff added in. Like I would not use chicken fertilizer from a chicken battery egg farm, for instance. But local people are apt to have perfectly nice, in fact, they're probably organic chicken food, right?
Probably, yes.
Mealworms for treats. I mean, I do know people like that. So the one thing about it, it's pretty hot. So there you definitely want to make sure it cools off. You might mix it half and half with dairy manure, which tends to be a lot cooler. But one thing chicken manure is awesome for is some of the hot crops that are gross feeders like tomatoes. Tomatoes are the best of everything. And so let it cool off a little, mix it a little bit with some dairy manure, and then you can use it as mulch around tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, stuff that needs a hit of some, they don't mind it being a little on the hot side, right? And it's strong.
Okay, thanks.
Beth is back.
That's hot.
Chicken. So let's say, like I only have 2 chickens left, but if you have hot chicken feed and poop and you put it on, would it be the same thing as with the cow manure that you mound over it and then it calms down?
Yeah, if you want to cool it fairly quickly and get it to break down fast, you stir it.
Okay.
You have a heap and you stir it. Mine was always mixed in with straw, bedding straw and stuff like that, which cools it down a little bit faster too. But yeah, stir it. And then with those hot crops and even squash and things, it'd be good for that. But you don't put it right around the neck of the plant. You put it around, the growth roots are always around the drip line of the plant, right? So as the tomatoes get bigger, and if you're pruning it, think where the drip line would have been if you hadn't, because that's where the active feeder roots are going to be, right? The roots don't stop growing because you pinch the limbs off, right? So you don't, like I said, you don't put it up against the neck, but you put it in more of a, for things like peas and beans, then I would put dairy manure just over the whole bed and then plant right into it, mixing the little pocket that I'm going to plant directly into. That makes sense? One thing I've been doing a lot more lately in the last few years too, is it came from working at the senior center where it was getting all that heat and wind from, and southwest exposure, lots of reflected heat off asphalt surfaces and a lot of wind from the water. And we discovered that the beds were drying out so fast. Rita and I were killing ourselves trying to keep them watered that first year. But we mulched with medium sort of wood chips. And that just makes it lightly, not a huge, deep, big thing of it, but just enough, like a tiny top dressing. That was enough to protect the soil and keep the moisture locked in. And it made a huge difference in how much less watering we had to do. If you have a sunny, exposed garden bed, that's a good kind of thing to put down. Also, if you're growing stuff like squash where you don't really want it on the wet soil, then even a little deeper bed of and when I wood chips, I mean arborist chips, not bark, but a little deeper bed of bark will give you can put something like strawberries can sit on that and not rot as fast as they would on the wet soil. Anita, you had a question, I think.
I have a question about saving seeds. You said you showed that big jar that you have. I have a little jar, but I've been keeping it in the freezer. Or should I have it at room temperature?
Well, some seeds don't really like that too much. Like the tropical seeds don't take freezing all that well necessarily. A lot of the hardy greens and stuff, they won't care. You don't really need to do that for the most part. One thing I do is like, rather if this old packet gets kind of tatty, or if I'm going to do seed swapping, I use these coin envelopes and write on them like what it is. And just, again, keeping it in a jar that's out of direct sunlight. So it's not getting too hot or too cold or anything else. And if you have a humidity issue, like your house is particularly humid, some people use air humidifiers, then I would put maybe one of those sachets that come with vitamins and things like that are moisture absorbers. You drop one of those in there, or even a couple sheets of, I've made them myself in the past out of dry milk powder wrapped in a piece of paper towel. And that absorbs a lot of moisture and keeps the seeds really dry, because keeping them dry is much more important than keeping them super cold.
Oh, okay. And another question I have, I garden with my little grandson, and so I think last summer, I think we planted Ed Hume snap, or what did you call them? Snap peas or garden peas. We had a terrific crop. Oh, it was just so abundant, just kept going. I couldn't believe it. But my little grandson pulls out all, I'm thinking that's where the seeds came from, but the seed packet is long gone. It doesn't stay on the end of the row. So, but I did save some of the seeds from last year, and I thought, well, we'll plant them and see what we get. But is it likely they'll be as abundant as they were last summer?
Yeah, peas are pretty good. They tend to last for maybe as much as 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
Viable, as long as they haven't been exposed to moisture, because then they'll start sprouting even in the pack.
Yeah, no, I didn't know if drying them, from pods that matured on the vine, if they were going to be the same as what the mother plant had been.
Yes, they should be. Okay. One thing that that you would want to make sure that you do another time is maybe take a picture of the seed packet.
Yes. Yes, I think I'll make maps this year too.
That's actually a good idea, because then you can make sure that you're rotating your crops, because especially in small gardens, like if you grow the same stuff over and over and over, there's something called rose family sickness, for instance. Like if you grow strawberries every year, year after year after year, you exhaust the soil of certain nutrients and you have to actually rebalance them periodically, or you start, the crops get smaller and smaller. And anything in the rose family that's true of. So primroses can get that disorder, it's really interesting. So you want to kind of move stuff around and think like growth feeders, like tomatoes, you should be followed maybe by a grassy crop like corn or greens, right?
Okay.
And kind of rotate the families so that the soil has a chance to kind of restore its balance. And of course, you're putting down compost. And I like to put humic acid down there too. So Rita and I were talking about that earlier. It's not available yet for the most part in nursery stores, or even like I get it at Ace, usually it's a granulated product in a, zip bag. And I usually scatter that at March, April, maybe. And then I'm starting to put more compost down. And then that kind of helps the soil. It isn't nutrients as such, but it's soil builder. So it helps, it's part of the active component of compost. And what it does is help soil quality. It helps it retain moisture better and also be open and airy. Like I was talking about in the beginning, after the winter, the soil has been frozen and thawed and frozen and thawed, and it's open and beautiful. And then we walk all over it and mess it up. But humic acid can help retain some of the strength of the soil so that it doesn't get compacted so easily.
Okay, great. I wrote that down. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So I had a question too, and I was going to say, I don't know if everybody knows this, but like at Bay Hay, you can get a big bag of straw sweepings. You want straw, not wheat. You want straw, and you can get them. And these be 99 cents. Maybe they're $2 now, but you can lay that down under your strawberries and stuff, and you don't need to get a whole bale of straw that is hard to deal with. You can just go and get a nice tall bag that, that a cubic foot of dirt would come in, and they have those there and they just give them to you. So that's also good if you want to have a resource and it's not super duper expensive and it's easy to handle. That's what I like.
Which is because a bale of straw is actually pretty heavy. And bedding straw, it's great. If you have a big garden, it's awesome because you can, you could build little mini greenhouses out of them. You could use them as holding tanks for, and make a raised bed in it. There's, lots of ways to use it, and it makes a wonderful cover, just like the wood chips I was talking about to help preserve the soil from drying out. But it's a lot. And if you have a tiny space, it's way more than you're going to use in 5 years, right? So yeah, going to Bay Hay and getting a bag full of because every time they move those bales around, they lose some of their fluff, right?
Right, exactly. And so they're great. They just fill up a bag for you. And like I said, it's less than $2 and it goes a long way and it's easy to handle.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea.
Can I ask you before we wrap up here what you and Rita have in mind this season at the senior center?
You can. We planted a bunch of bulbs, daffodil bulbs in the upper tier of the back garden. And we were just kind of discussing they should be coming up sometime soon.
A little thank you to Dave Webb for those.
Right. Yeah. He shared his extras with us. And then we put in quite a few, last summer, we put in quite a few hardy fuchsias. And they had a bit of a struggle last year because it was so hot for so long, so hot and dry and kind of hard to water up there, but they're still alive. I think, like every one of them has still got green on it. So this year we should see a lot more growth out of those. And we've been thinking about adding a number of other shrubs and things. I have some huckleberries that I wanted to put in there. I have a tea camellia we thought it'd be fun to put in. We have an olive tree, right? And
yes.
So you've got some big plans for the back area where we have picnics and get-togethers when the weather's a little nicer.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
And it looks like the work that you did a couple of years ago that is starting to really grow in now in the front.
Yeah, the pollinator patch in the front is doing beautifully, and we're just getting ready to we wait until, if you notice, there's birds on it all the time picking the seeds and stuff off that. It's getting to the place now where we're getting ready to kind of do the clean sweep for spring. You wait a little bit on that too, because some of those things are a
Right.
bit tender. If you take off the tops too quick, then it gets frozen next time we get a big freeze. But I think now we're pretty safe. One thing we have is many, 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 many strawberries, strawberry plants. And we have some of the original Marshall strawberries that were the big berry crop on this island, for the 100 years. And also we have, oh, Rita, what are they? I always forget. Is it Seascape or
Oh,
Seascape?
yes, they're seascape
Seascape.
strawberries that are like
Strawberries.
everbearing, yes.
They're so everbearing, they're still trying to bear right now. I was
Yeah.
looking at them and they had these little like, but yeah, those are really enthusiastic plants. And they've poured their babies over the side. So anybody who would like some, go right ahead, help yourself. The Marshalls are the ones farthest from the center toward the street parking, and the Seascape are the ones closest to the back door, to the library door. at the
So
center.
any advice on transplanting those?
Yeah, they're really complicated. You pick them up, you cut the stem, and you shove the bit in the ground, and they take off. It's amazing.
Okay,
Exactly, exactly. And then we're gonna also, up in the back, I've been trimming. And we're getting that cleaned up so that it looks much more inviting
Right.
back there. So we'll continue trimming and then we'll get it hauled away and it will be much, much nicer looking.
and I
needed a
should
haircut.
just note that these ladies have a lot of fun and they also welcome friends. So if this sounds
Yeah.
like something interesting, give the senior center a shout and we'll try to connect you so you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it is a lot of fun, and it's always more fun with somebody. Especially, it's more fun with Rita. Let me just say that.
We have a good time and we're trying to make it so that it's beautiful, but it doesn't take a lot of care and resources because, as we're all getting a little older and, it's harder to get up there and do some of that stuff, but
Well,
it's,
and it's a good rule for life.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. It's going to be fabulous this spring and summer back there. Fabulous.
Yeah, I'm getting settled in and I'm looking forward to joining you and helping you. So,
Great.
yeah.
That's great.
Oh, by the way, just quickly, I took just 2 of those little Marshall strawberries because I know you said take all you want, but I thought I better see if they'll even grow. And I stuck them in pots, and at first I thought, not so sure. And now they're just going great guns.
Yeah,
That's
and they like a lot of fertilizer. So those are gross feeders. Not all strawberries do, like the native ones don't particularly like it at all. But the Marshalls, the more, they do like to be fed every couple weeks. And then their leaves get big and the fruit will be a lot bigger.
Oh, wonderful. I asked my grandson what he would like planted this year, and he said, strawberries.
Well, there you go.
So I'll get some more. Thanks.
Let him go with
And
you
we're-
and gather them.
What's that?
Let him go with you and pick some that he
Oh.
likes.
Okay, when he visits. Great. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Thank-
So you'll be back on this topic. I mean, you'll be back next Monday to talk with me and folks about Stamped, which
Right.
we have copies still at the senior center. If you want to pick up a copy and catch up with us, we're not going to talk about the whole book on Monday. So you can get started and get a taste of what it is. And
Mhm.
we hope that you'll read the whole book, but if you read the first 4 chapters and decide you're not going to, you can turn it back in and somebody else can pick it up.
Or hand
Anyway.
it to a neighbor, right?
Or hand it to a neighbor. We want to get the books out there. It's part of BI Reads for Justice, which is going on in a lot of venues across Bainbridge Island. But Anne, you'll be back to talk about gardening on the 15th. I think that's 3 weeks into February.
It's always the third Wednesday, yeah. And then on March, I'm gonna have, I hope, trying to get somebody from the tribe to come and talk about water preserving, like their, tribal water protectors have some really good ideas about how to be very careful about the water the runoff out of our gardens and what we can do, especially if we're waterfront homeowners, how to be extremely protective of the shoreline and the cliffs and bluffs and so forth. So that should be, that should be a good rousing program.
Great. And we are so grateful for your generous time and sharing of your information and your enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did see Pat said who was one of the people who was basically listening in, said she really appreciated the opportunity to share the enthusiasm for the upcoming growing season.
Oh, nice.